And in 1984 he came over with a new film starring himself and Patrick McGoohan, which reunited the two actors for the first time since they appeared together on The Prisoner. And in that cult TV series he appeared as a fashion photographer with no name, no number. He then appeared in an episode with a non-speaking part, and finally got a number at the end. And then in Fallout he got another number that left the series with no name. But to us he's always had a name, he's always been a big name, and so please, a very warm welcome for the star of The Prisoner, who he knows, the kid, number 48, and as himself, Alexis Kanner. I've done a few weeks. Anybody got a cigarette? Anybody got a cigarette? Emergency. Emergency. Thank you, Glenn. Anyway, while you're lighting up, Alexis, a very warm welcome to Portmeirion 6 months prison conviction.
It's great. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable to see two, maybe more, new generations of the audience. I really had frankly expected it to be a trip down memory lane. There would have been a sea of blue-head ladies. I'm so thrilled because, I mean, it's happened, hasn't it? It's become, it is today, us, we're all members. I mean, I knew which motive to push him. I had the access to the computer, I could go probably had to check.
We've been asked to put the level of the sound up a bit. Can it go up a bit, please?
Is that okay? Can everyone hear anything?
Can everybody hear it? No, we need it up a bit, please. Okay,
Oh, that's
is that better?
It might be better than if you don't turn the volume off, which would be a little closer.
Okay, so
How's that?
Alexis, it's your first time in Portmeirion, and you wanted to come here. Does it feel like you've been here before?
The strangest thing is like coming home on you've never been here before. And American baseball player Yogi Berra said it was deja vu all over again.
Well, we'll talk about, and Dave will talk about The Prisoner a bit later. Just some background. You were born in France. You went to Canada, made Canada your home for most of your life.
No, just for school years.
Yeah. And was it the school years where you got the acting bug?
Yes.
And I think you appeared in some school productions,
Yes.
college productions.
Yes. And then
Became leading man quite soon in a number of those.
yes, I
productions.
was still in high school. Yes.
And did that lead you to seek an acting career and come over to England?
Yes, I had an offer. I had two offers. One was to go to the Royal Academy on scholarship, and the other was to head the company at the Birmingham Repertory Theatre, classical theatre, and I was hired at school, so I took the job instead.
And throughout the 60s, most of that time you were in England, so you saw the whole of the 60s, the swinging on and
Well, what you could see after they had been described as the mentality of the country.
I think in those years you also had several TV roles, quite big TV roles. You appeared in The Saint in the early 60s.
Yeah, I did in about 2 years, I must have done 15 or 16, started in 15 or 16, what were then called things like armchair theatre and other some series too, like The Saint and ultimately The Prisoner.
Did you in perhaps the most famous TV role apart from The Prisoner, in Softly Softly, when you were the detective constable in the police force, played Max Stone? I think there were
Bad boy of British television.
Yeah, and was there a bit of a furore when you reached the last of your episodes in that and came out of the series?
There was, I mean, the lead was unbelievable. then it was called, their lines were jammed for 3 hours a night. I had to hire a bodyguard to take me home. And home wasn't safe. I got in at 2 o'clock in the morning with a photographer sitting on my bed. I don't know how to. And there were questions in the House of Commons, you know, why did we go to 4 o'clock for all TV licenses if we have no concern about it? And let me be frank and honest. And it was quite extraordinary. In fact, Lawrence Olivier asked me to go to the National, what was then the old thing, shortly thereafter, and one of the first questions, this was to play Sky Masterson and guys involved, he was going to play Leaving Detroit, 2 parts played by Brando and Sinatra in the movie. And one of the first questions he asked was, is it really true? And I said, yes, it's really true. It's true. Actors don't usually have that power. They should have run for prime minister.
But just to read from one of the reports at that time, that there was an audience of 22 million that watched your last episode.
Yeah, we tried to keep it quiet, but it made it very good.
And then the week after that, the audience had dropped by 90%.
According to the Times.
So during the 60s, while you were, I think, on stage during the night and filming during the day with like connected rooms with
Yes.
dailies, so you were split between TV and the theatre.
Yes, I was at the Shakespeare Company at night and I was filming during the day, so it was kind of a... I kind of missed the 60s, I just worked. I had to rely on what my brother does.
You were much sought after, quite a few productions in the 60s, film, television and theatre. You seem to be working all the time in the 60s on quite
Yes,
a few
well,
productions.
I had managed to pivot on my age and I had, 8 or 10 years when I used to get work. And once I became accepted, I stayed on the role because I figured sooner or later if I find out the truth, they're going to hate me. For being a brat, because those were the days when youth was not yet popular, youth was in revolt. Words like precocious or dirty words, and I mean, today people like young people. I know a screenwriter in California who has an Oscar and 2 Emmys, and he's only in his late 40s, but when he writes a new screenplay, he sends his son in with it, who's in his 20s, because he really would rather see his son.
You appeared just after the Prisoner in Cross Club, you met up with Roger Moore again, who appeared with you in The Saint.
Yes.
And was that was a fun picture to make? Was it was a very fast-moving picture?
It was, and we had a lot of fun, and I had a very nice house, Woburn Abbey. And it was good, and we became friends after that. In fact, I then went and made a picture in America called Mahoney's Last Stand, and I recommended it to Roger. I sent him some footage that he used for the Bond movie, the actress, Maud Adams, and she in fact eventually made 2 Bond movies with Roger. Octopussy
and I think in Cross Block, Brendan Stafford was doing the photography in that.
Does he? Brendan do that?
Yeah, he worked on the Prisoner. You also did some films with a couple of films with Michael Redgrave.
Yes.
Rooms and with my Gemini. And then you did several films, American and Canadian productions. When did you first start doing your own directing?
Mahoney's Last Stand was the first one, and I tried not to wear all the hats, because wearing all the hats becomes totally insane. In Kings of Desperate Men, I wrote it, co-wrote it, directed it, produced it, co-starred in it. And by the time I saw my name come up for credit 3 or 4 times, I really began to get embarrassed. I was totally out of my wig by that time with fatigue. I'd also edited it and also been one of the directors of photography, so I invented a pseudonym. Henri Lucas is credited with Henri, my first name, Lucas, middle name, characterized by Henri Lucas is credited with doing a lot of the jobs on the picture. But it turns out I really saw straight through that. Because I see now in the annual film thing of the 80s, they say, Kanner did, and then it puts brackets, uncredited, and just all.
So with Kings, which we'll talk about in more detail in a moment because you worked with McGoohan, was that a film, I think, where the co-writer, Edward Ward, was somebody that you met in connection with a play on TV?
Yes, I had started one of those long wonderful play used to be on television, not movie called Facing Chair at, I think we call it a fusion. So I didn't have to do screenplay. And then I did a movie he wrote about Gemini. And then when I had this notion about the first of the hostage scenes that everybody does now, which is the first skyscraper to take the hostage, it's totally unbelievable and incredible that now everyone's ready to die hard. Boats and trains, planes, and they take the whole earth hostage.
Die hard. You had to investigate this? Can you talk about this?
Well, Fox asked me if I'd like to remake Kings and Western with American actor and Patrick McGoohan. I said no, because I wrote this, and this was always with Patrick. They said, well, it's such a great situation we saw that if we had an American actor and it was a little more accessible to the audience, Alexis, and I said I didn't think I wanted to get involved, and they went and did it anyway.
I just remember a list of all the similarities on one side between Kings and Patrick and rather than another.
Yes, it made the lead story on Independence Night and went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and federal. It was on its way to the Supreme Court, and I didn't want to do it anymore. Because I thought, I'm pretty lucky to get back to doing what I do.
Just staying with Kings, was it the idea that came to you first, the terrorist takeover of the radio station? Was it a theme that came first, or was it the whole screenplay idea?
It was a theme that came first. What happened was that I was visiting Montreal, where the Olympics were about to take place. I happened to be there. And I met Monsieur Guy Toupin, who was the head of the police forces and security arrangements for the Olympics. And everyone was terrified that the massacre of Munich was going to be repeated, that this was going to be the really big one. And he and I sat and I asked him about his security arrangements. It was beginning to boil around in my head. And while I was sitting with him, I was sitting across the desk from him, I could read it upside down, a classified document, thick bound little affair, that had been circulated to 8 or 10 of the metropolitan police chiefs in North America. And I could read the headline upside down, and it said, "Beware random killing in the 80s and 90s. And I said, "Can I see that?" And he said, "No." It was the word random that stuck with me, and something about that, the merciless cruelty of random killing. And there was more and more of it around, and I talked to Edward about that. And so finally the story emerged of this skyscraper and these two people, the terrorists, but basically the same relationship in a kind of a way as Patrick and I had in the last episode.
Was it that naturally brought to mind the idea of having McGoohan and yourself opposite each other on screen with that same chemistry?
Well, it was a great tragic role, and I just could not imagine anybody with Patrick playing.
I believe most people in 61 have had an opportunity to see the movie because it's been on the television on Channel 4. But just in case any people who haven't seen it, McGoohan plays a kind of English ham actor, flamboyantly carrying out this radio phone-in program. You take over the radio station and hold a retrial of a case that you've recently dealt with as an attorney, where you feel that the outcome was unjust. Is that
yes? And it's basically about a sealed and closed environment, which is why it travels so easily, like a skyscraper, a Die Hard, a boat, a train, Steven Seagal, Bruce Willis, everyone's doing it now.
What was it that led you to, as it were, the end of the movie where, without giving too much away, that things start to fall apart? The big idea that you have to correct a wrong starts to collapse. And
that was entirely based on, I called Patrick in California about that because I wanted him to understand the nature of the terrorist. And we talked about it, and it was entirely based on the Bader-Meinhof gang, the girl in the Baader-Meinhof. Meinhof was the woman. She was totally out of her tree. She didn't have both oars in the water. But Andreas Baader was an idealist who eventually hung himself under very curious circumstances in the German jail. And Baader was the sort of dangerous innocent that causes much mayhem and killing in the world.
And
So I thought Miller, the terrorist in King's Instrument, should be a guy who has not thought this through and has never committed a criminal offense in his life.
as though your own ideals in film were hijacked by the other terrorists, because they make them turn out more violent than perhaps you intended.
That's right, and these things do get out of control, and in fact Ulrich Meinhof got out of control. That's what brought the Baader-Meinhof down.
Nevertheless, you looked quite at home with a shotgun in several scenes. Did you have any training for that?
No, but Patrick made me rehearse it a number of times. He was going to go off somewhere in his vicinity.
It was described, a number of press notices at the time, very compelling film with fascinating and mesmerising performances from you and McGoohan. Were you pleased with the outcome, the way the film appeared in its final form?
Hitchcock said that he was always grateful if he got 60% of his attention up on the screen. And I don't know what chance anybody else has if that's the best you can do. And also when you see yourself on the screen, you're never happy. You're just hideously embarrassed and can't believe a word you say and don't know why anybody else would. But I think Patrick gives the greatest performance of his life, and he said so in the press. In fact, in one interview, unlike Patrick, he said to an American newspaper that he thought now that he could die happy because he knew that there was a record on film of his best work for his grandchildren to see. And he was tremendous. Those kind of parts don't come along very often. And when they do, they are not often in the hands of a filmmaker who's also an actor. He's devoted to getting the best performance on screen, and he's willing to make bad cuts to save the best take, bad edits, just because it's more important that the actor comes over well.
Did you find you had to do that, Alex?
Yes, I certainly had to do that because Patrick gave a very, very intense performance, and sometimes in shots that we did, he would be in front of the microphone here, the camera would be over here, and he would be saying, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I happen to have with me in the studio today a desperate man. I'm reminded of, whatever it is, the quote from John Donne, "Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men." And sometimes he would have a pen in his right hand, and sometimes he'd have it in his left hand, and sometimes he'd have the hat on, and sometimes he wouldn't have the hat on, and in the end, when I didn't ever want to stop him and bother him about this, because I wanted to stay with the performance, and I worry about the continuity, whether things matched later. And of course, nothing matched. So, all the editors that I had nervous breakdowns trying to get this to match. Finally, I said, look, people are not going to notice which hand the pen is in. They're only going to notice his performance. And what we'll go for the best takes where he's absolutely breathtaking. And I promise you they wouldn't notice if the building was falling down. And I think largely that works. One or two critics carped about the editing, but...
And there were some quite tender scenes where a side of McGoohan that perhaps is not often seen on screen, where he's talking to the child.
Yes, yes. It took a lot of to get it to do that. That doesn't come easily to Patrick, as you know. He's a guy with edge. And he took a long time before he agreed to sing to the kid.
There's a lot of comedy as well. I mean, it sounds very doer the way it's described.
Yeah, it sounds generally good. I don't know why anybody would go to it. Nobody did.
But it is funny, though, isn't it?
It is funny. I mean, when you see it with an audience, you know, what is basically something where you might snicker to yourself under your breath. You got 1,200 people in the cinema. 1,200 snickers is a very loud sound.
The bit I'm thinking of is the bit where McGoohan's going to the French verbs.
Ah.
And at the end, he goes, poof!
Yes, I do indeed. He couldn't, and I can't blame him when I never did. He couldn't face learning every one of those French words. So I had them written on a blackboard for it, just slightly for the camera. Didn't show.
Just give a moment, please.
No, that's all right.
That's right. Well, I just see if Dave wanted to add anything about Kings or whether we move on.
Well, the only thing I'm thinking of really is we've talked about McGoohan. I'd like to, before we get on to the Prisoner, just ask how you actually first met McGoohan and got involved really with him in a professional capacity.
By the way, if you have tapes of Kings that were released in brick videos, they're terrible. It looks like it's filmed under the water. You can't hear it. But there's going to be a new release which will be as good and as that wonky, tacky tape is gone, destroyed. How did Untitled was covered, which I didn't even know till Dave told me, which was nightmare.
I think that, just perhaps a final word on Kings, that the Times, it was said, it noted that the film received about the best publicity for
They received the best press, according to the Times, the best reviews for a film to come out of England in 10 years. And,
it's highly rated.
That's extraordinary, because that includes, in the 80s, it includes Chariots of Fire and some amazing movies. So I must say, but I guess what took my breath away most about the British response to the movie and the critics was that it was not just the elite and not just the smart-ass, smart film critics. It was the high street, the main street. It was, papers that were read by minors. And the fact that it was able to cross.
It had a sudden impact when it did arrive, and a lot of the press took it up, and it was, for a while, a must-see film. It didn't have a wide release.
No, I think they over-released it because the press was so fantastic that, at one stage it was playing in 8 cinemas in London, and none of them were more than half a mile from each other. Well, how many people could you get on the hand of a pin,
When the latter part of the 60s, just leaving the prison for the moment, you worked with David Tomlin in a UFO episode.
Yes, Lou Gray, who backed Prisoner on a handshake with Patrick, called and said that he was in big trouble with, was it called UFO? Yeah. And he was having trouble selling them to the Americans. He had about 25 of these already, and he couldn't get them to buy it. And he said, would you look at a couple and see what you could do? So David and I went in, and we looked. And the problem was, it had been made by these very nice people who had done Thunderbirds, in which all the puppets were like people. And now they've made a series with people, in which all the people were like puppets. And it was just horrific. And so Dave and I said we would do it. We would try and do something on the condition that the regulars didn't interfere much in this one. And Lou said, whatever it takes, my boy. Whatever it takes. And so we came up with this cat with 10 lives, which the 2 stars were myself and the Siamese cat, who was the son of the legend. And was terrific during all his shots, but rough during mine. And I discovered recently that they actually got the outtakes unbeknownst to me and Dave, and released it as a full-length feature in some parts of Europe.
So, are there any other films or programs today we want to cover before we move on to the Prisoner?
The only other thing I actually saw on video, I don't know if that's theatrical release, but it was Nightfall, a very interesting film, nicely shot, but made in the late 80s.
Yeah, made in Arizona, from an interesting novella by Isaac Asimov. Yeah. It was a beautiful screenplay by Paul Meyersberg, and it was mutilated by the distributors. But it turned out to be a huge moneymaker for them. It's made more money for them than just about anything they had of that period. Nightfall is an interesting book.
You played a blind man.
Blind priest, yeah, blind kind of the leader of this religion on this faraway planet, which is conflict with the sciences.
And I think it's just to let you have a bit of the synopsis of the plot, that the inhabitants are waiting for night to fall after 1,000 years. It's a strange...
Yes, they've never had a nightfall, because they have 3 suns. And the suns start to set for the first time that anyone knows. And one at a time they go down. And no one knows. Sora, the character I play, predicts that it is the doom of humanity. Or
Mahoney film that you mentioned, where I think you described it as a back to nature.
Back to nature subject. Myself and Sam Waterston, the 2 guys who go out and destroy the countryside, a beautiful, beautiful countryside like this Welsh countryside. They rent some land and they turn it into it looks like the surface of the moon. Rocks won't even grow there by the time they're finished. Back to nature.
And I think in the same year as The Prisoner, 67, you did a film called The Early Game, which was another psychological drama about a girl who leaves hospital with mental problems.
So I played Ernie. Yeah.
You played Ernie?
Yes.
Yeah.
like a silver thing for that.
I was going to say, that's why I mentioned it.
Very highly, Alex. The silver thing.
Yeah. You also...
It's either a bear or an Eskimo.
The Silver Bear Award and an Academy nomination.
It was the guy who made that was actually one of the few authentic geniuses I ever met, and Don Owen. Shortly thereafter, he kind of unraveled and stopped making movies, but in his younger years, he had people like Bertolucci who worshipped the ground he walked on. He was a brilliant guy. It's a very interesting movie. Leonard Cohen wrote the music. He wrote the Stranger song for me. Yeah, it was an interesting movie.
So, on to The Prisoner. The last 3 episodes, leaving aside Once Upon a Time, which had been filmed a few months earlier, but you were a very major presence in those 3 episodes. Perhaps we can talk about each
Well,
one.
Once Upon a Time, it wasn't filmed earlier. I think it was showed in sequence earlier.
It was shown as the penultimate.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely...
Sorry, Girl Who Was Dead. Sorry.
Girl Who Was Dead and Harmony would be shot the same. Which one did you do?
I think Harmony first. Dave said, I'm not going to South End without you. Come down and we'll make something. I think it was
South End.
Talking about Harmony, you tell us about the way you set up the character of the kid and the strange costume that he had.
Well, the script was absolutely an I don't know how you say it, an archetypal, complete mythological western. There's a man without a name, played by Patrick, who was coerced into bringing justice in his town. There was the kid without a name who kills. There was the judge, the judges, the girl. All no-name people who had, of course, who had numbers in the village. And the designers had all kinds of ideas of how this should look, and with Dave's blessing, I was allowed to raid Berman's, the costumers, and I put together an outfit that didn't fit. A top hat I found, a pair of leather pants that were size 54, and I was size 28 or something. And my theory was that he basically put all this together for people he killed. He just robbed dead bodies, and he was just...
Norman was talking about this last night.
First serial killer.
Is that important to you as well when you actually approach a role? Norma says that she invents a history for that character in her own mind that she uses to actually deliver the lines and portray the character. Do you do the same thing in your own mind, invent a history, or obviously you do?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, in Harmony, for example, it was really necessary to understand what kind of deprivation that kid had gone through and what kind of a disadvantaged and bizarre childhood that made him now totally subservient to a slave, like Caliban, a slave to the judge, who can reduce him to...
What was the steps leading up to coming into the prison? You say you did Harmony first.
I think Patrick had seen me in something and wanted me to do it, and Dave said I worked with him when he was a kid in the movie. He was one of the ADs on the picture when I was under contract at Columbia.
Was that Reach for Glory?
Yes, that's right.
And you told this story before, but it's entertaining about the gunfight, the famous gunfight at the end of Harmony.
Well, yes. Patrick sent a telegram from, in those days there were no faxes, from Los Angeles that basically said, look, I'm getting lessons from Sammy Davis Jr., the best in the world, and from Steve McQueen, and I expect a really good show when I arrive. And so I was given the cold pacemaker to take home, and to practice, and I practiced, and I practiced, and I practiced, and I practiced, until I practiced in the mirror. Finally, to get it quicker and quicker and quicker, you couldn't just pull the trigger on those old guns because they didn't have a spring mechanism. You had to cock it and then fire it, cock it and fire it. But if you cocked it and fired it, it would be spaghetti before you. So, quick to fanning. Fanning is a very serious business. And to make it even quicker, I eliminated the trigger, just wired it back. So the gun go off was this. Except, I think it was Frank Mayer, the stuntman, told me that I was taking, my life in my hands because I would be ripping it out of the holster with a full load of gunpowder in it, And I had the trigger wire back, so it would just fire automatically if it hit anything. And Robert Mitchum had shot a piece of his leg off that way once. And in any case, by the time we got to the final shootout, a lot of money was wagered because the guy said I got pretty quick, and then there was a rumor that Patrick had got quicker. And there was a lot of money on the sidelines as to who was going to outdraw who. The theory was that both guns would go off together, and you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know until the kid fell forward who had received the mortal wound. Except that Dave Tomlin came over to me just before we shot it in the dusty street of his town and said, "I've got a favor to ask you, young man." And I said, "Yes." I was immediately suspicious from his tone of voice. He said, "Well, you know, he's right behind Patrick with his hand like this. And the camera is looking at you between the butt of Patrick's gun and his hand. And I want that camera to zoom in on you in time to see you draw, replace the gun, and after a time fall forward and die. The only way the cameraman is going to know when to do that is if he sees Patrick's gun clear the holster before you do anything." Do I do anything? Oh, Dave, come on. He said, "No, it'll be our secret, my boy." So I kept an eagle eye on Patrick's hand, and when I saw daylight, he had the gun in his hand and it was out of his holster, I did what I had to do. And of course the guns went off together, and nobody knew who'd won the bet, the enormous bet laid on the sideline. I had to wait for the film to come back. I still own that little strip of film. This film goes through the camera. It takes 24 pictures every second. And we were able to count the next day. Patrick took 16 or 17 frames, 17 parts of the 24 parts of the second to get his gun out, and I only took 11, so it was 11.
You want to do quite a few stunts in the Harmony episode when the girl who was dead in the roller coaster.
Well, I didn't have any lines. And so Dave and I were talking, and my disguise was very thin, black shoe polish. And I just started to pop up in strange places here and there. We made it up as we went along, and one among the strange places was riding backwards on a roller coaster, standing on the rail. I mean, I couldn't do that in civilian life. It'd pain me. I mean, I wouldn't go frontwards, seated.
We had a guest here, Len Harris. He was the camera operator who had to shoot that, and he thought you were a maniac.
It's amazing what you can do when the camera's rolling. I mean, the stuff in Fallout, nobody can do that. There's no way to rehearse that. No stuntman could do it. There was absolutely no way. There's no way you can rehearse jumping onto rails that are only as wide as this lighter, jumping over people's heads further and further down. If you rehearse that, you'll get killed. And if you rehearse it, the insurance companies will find out and they'll stop the filming. So the best thing to do is just do it. And Patrick had bribed all the stuntmen and offered them 100 quid for the first guy who laid a hand on me. So I was genuinely running for my life, except that he made me do it 49 times.
The scene at the end of Fallout where you're running...
Dead bones, then run.
Yeah. Perhaps one of the most famous scenes in the Prisoner, but there are some very precarious shots in that where you're leaping from...
And it was all made up. There was no rehearsals. I mean, these guys were ganging up on me, and there was the gurney lying there, the stretcher that they brought Leo up on, I think, and I just shoved it at him. Now there was nowhere to go, so I chased the stretcher and jumped on it. All that was improvised. And I must say the guys were amazing. It was amazing nobody got hurt.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work with Leo on that one and Angelo Muscat?
Well, first of all, I'd complained to Patrick that we were killing everybody. It was supposed to be a pacifist series, and he said, well, there's the irony. And anyway, he said, you've got to escape because you're doing the next 39 without me, which was the first I'd heard of it. In fact, I did sign, that was the deal was that I would do the next 39 as a kind of escapee, being chased around the world by these faceless, nameless people. The thing, Leo took a little convincing to come back. I think that that two-hander, that great, brilliant, what's it called? Once Upon a Time. I think that took a lot out of Leo. And I had to call Leo and say, Leo, we can't get out without you. It's just you, me, and Angelo, and I've got to continue on afterwards, running around the world. And Patrick has an idea for a wonderful shot for the episode number 18. At the Tokyo Olympics, he's going to pan along with, he's not going to appear anymore, he's going to pan along all the marathon runners with the camera and then go right to the back of the marathon, and they're running along. He's the kid with a top hat, and the camera's going to continue right past him, and there in the background, 100 meters behind him on his little short legs, going as fast as he can, is Angelo, keeping an eye on the kid, trying to keep him out of harm's way around the world, and that would be the basis of the race.
It is very interesting that you mentioned this, actually. I mean, there's some sort of confirmation to this, because I know Steve Rich, when he was doing his documentaries about the prisoner, he did come across another series, a script from another series called Vagabond, which every man were going to make, and it's very similar to the thing that you actually said.
That's right.
It may not be the thing, but it's the idea.
But it tied into Patrick's theme of rebellious youth, and of course, we had just come to the end of the 80s, where kids had revolted against, people were suspicious of anybody over 30. But I think everyone was so whacked out by the end. I mean, it was just unbelievable. We used to get up at, we'd finished the day's work, 8, 9, 10 at night. Dave and Pat and I would go and have a pint in the pub. We weren't allowed to talk. And then around midnight, Patrick would take me to a school in Mill Hill, a girls' school, and he had the key to the squash court. We'd play squash till 1 o'clock. I'd get about an hour and a half sleep from 2 to 3:30, and I'd have to get up and try and get in before him in the morning to the studio. It was a matter of pride as to who arrived first, and every time I came in, when he came up those dark steps, there was a hideous figure at the top of the steps. No matter how early I got in a bathrobe looking down at me, it was Patrick, and he'd say, "Are you well?" And I'd say, "Yes." And he'd say, "Good, because it's going to be another day of indescribable brutality." And by the end, there was nobody really who was standing. Patrick went and lived in Switzerland, and people had nervous breakdowns, and various. One member of the crew, who was terribly important and shall be nameless, was in a sanitarium for 8 months after.
I can't let you pass that bit without mentioning one of my favourite stories I've heard you tell. Because 6 of 1 recognises the importance of drinking in the prisoner. You hear the agreement there. And there was one particular story where you got fed up with this facing the bar.
Yeah, well,
would you like to know?
I saw an Andy Cap.
That's the one.
This wonderful Andy Cap in which he's leaning against the counter at the bar, at the pub, in the pub. He's at the bar, and it's drawn from behind, so he's got his back like this. Oops, sorry. He's got his back like this, doing his cap. And a guy comes in, second frame, orders a pint, says, "Nice day." Nothing. In the 4th frame, the guy leaves. Character's all by himself, looks up and goes, "Amateur." So I had this in my pocket. Now I'm standing for the 9 millionth time at the bar in Boreham Wood with Patrick and Dave, and we're all standing 5 feet from the bar like this. No one's looking at anyone. No one's talking. I got the Scotch tape ready, and I take out the anti-cap, and I pasted it over the bar. Both of them looked up. Nobody else. Silence. I think Patrick may have said, Amateurs. Of course, if they'd known how old I was, they wouldn't have let me. They wouldn't have given me the job.
That's interesting that you should mention that, Alex, because your biography lists 3 birthdays.
4. I found 4. I have found born in 59, born in 52, born in 42, and born in 1929.
So you could have been anywhere from a 70 to 6.
Yeah, well, I have very good genes.
Yeah.
When the curtain came down on Fallout and the series came to an end, I mean, did it feel at the time that it had happened suddenly, or was it on the cards for some time? Was everybody expecting it? Did you know it was the last episode?
Well, we thought of it as number 17 with another, whatever, 17 from 39 is.
So you would think
22 to go.
There were more times.
But no one, we got to the stage where we weren't talking about tomorrow, we were just all hoping that we'd get through the next hour.
How about the business of...
Pat was a little tired.
Yeah, the business of McGoohan deciding to make the characters number 1, number 6 in effect. Did you think that was the right way to end the series? Was there any other option?
No, well, you know, he's a brilliant writer. In fact, he's a great writer. I have a lot of his poetry, which he never publishes, and he knew that he wanted to come up to the standard of irony. I mean, because it is a fable, it's an allegory, it's all those things. And he wanted to come up to the standard of irony from the whole series at the end. And there was a lot of talk about what to do and what would be appropriate. And I said, well, I think when you pull the mask off, it should be Luke Reid. Or you, or, you know, there was a lot of joking. And finally, he came round to, he didn't want it to be a pat or cute or a neat. He wanted it to be as puzzling and disturbing as everything else. And of course, he did the right thing, because we have seen the enemy, and the enemy is us.
You've directed him, he's directed you in that episode, and you've obviously got a lot of respect for each other, and you've kept in touch, is that right?
Yeah, we have as a matter of pride that we don't cancel our weekly lunch dates, because he who cancels will cancel the following week or get cancelled. So we've tried to keep that up, except when we're thousands of miles apart filming. Although he has the most geographically mobile guy in the world. He's the only person I've ever known who was prepared on the spur of the moment with nothing but his wallet in his pocket and no luggage to get on an airplane. He's turned up a couple of times when I was like 3,000 miles away. He's knocked on the door and said, let's have lunch. I got a message from him once. My mum was in hospital and I couldn't return the call right away. And it had like, I don't know, 13 digits in the number. When I called the number, they said, oh, Mr. McGoohan has checked out. And I said, where is he? And they said, oh, we can't say. The fact is, we don't know, but even if we did know, we wouldn't say. And I said, well, where are you? And it turned out to be like 40 miles from here, from Portmeirion. I was in Montreal in a hospital in an emergency.
You've seen, I think you mentioned, you've seen the latest film he's been in, The Phantom. You say he's
Yes,
very good in that.
Brilliant. It's absolutely the most inspired thing that they did was the Phantom's dad is always there over his shoulder, even though he's deceased at moments when he's needed, and the relationship between him and the Phantom is great. I haven't seen Time to Kill yet. Of course, it's the #1 picture in America last week. Let me see, what else is he? Well, Braveheart, I thought he deserved the Oscar for that, as much as he did for Kings and Desperate Men, but the studio again didn't get behind it. I mean, I had a knockdown argument with Paramount about this because they weren't advertising and they weren't campaigning. They didn't realize what the potential of this movie was. They had re-released Braveheart, really just to amuse Mel Gibson, to please Mel. Everyone wanted to please Mel, you know. And by the time they realized the quality of the work, they had time to only take out one ad, a full-page color ad of Patrick as Longshanks. And the ballots were already in. It wasn't, I mean, getting an Academy Award is like a political campaign. You can't just, you got to stick with it. And I never did, and Patrick never did, and Paramount never did. So.
You've obviously heard, as all of us have, that the idea of a prisoner movie is very much a project in planning at the moment.
Well, it's come up a number of times before. I mean, I've seen every draft that Patrick has written over the years, some of them breathtaking and end at page 40 instead of page 120, some that lead nowhere and some that go up cul-de-sacs, always great quality writing. And I think this time, it's in actuality, I'm absolutely sure that we'll be able to see this movie in the cinemas in the next 18 months. Only twice before have I believed that it was close. And that was when I was told by George Axelrod and John Frankenheimer, who made The Manchurian Candidate, which was a very kind of like Prisoner, Paranoia subject. And that didn't come to anything, and Saul Zaentz called once. He was the guy who produced One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Downstairs. But this time I'm absolutely sure it's for real, and I frankly believe Mel will play the part. And I will play whatever I'm offered. I think I know what I'll play.
Have you spoken to McGoohan about the film recently?
Yes.
When did you see him last?
June 28th?
And at that stage he was writing the script, did he?
Yeah, it was due. The script was due in January, and he actually handed it in last week. But that's not unusual. I mean, 6 or 8 month overrun on a serious piece of work like that is not at all unusual in the writing stage.
In your experience, Alex, what's the next step? How is a film made these days? What will happen now? McGoohan's written the script. What the stages are going to actually become a reality?
But I think there's going to be some gut-wrenching decisions. For one thing, you know, movies are a collective medium, and to some extent they are a director's medium. The question now is going to be who's going to stand behind the camera. And it's an exhausting job. It nearly killed Mel Gibson to do all his jobs. It nearly killed me. It nearly killed Warren Beatty on Red. It nearly killed Patrick. And so that's going to be a gut-wrenching and important decision. But I don't think there's anything standing in its way now. I think Polygram is a terribly good company. They really have a lot to say about this because of course they acquired from ITC all Prisoner. I see Frank is sitting there. All the Prisoner rights, and I think that there's enough. Patrick, since Haynes and Desperate Men, has made 6 or 7 movies in a row that have done very well, and that revived his film career. And he now can pick up the phone and talk to any studio, and talk to any studio boss like that. And so it doesn't even really depend so much now on Mel having to play the part before people will put up the $40 million or whatever it's going to cost. And now that the technology is so good, much of this pursuit stuff with Rover and all this paranoia, I mean, now it's going to be possible without having to do funny things with the lens for the walls to come in. I mean, the computer will be able to generate the most terrifying imageries, which could never be done before. And now they can be done just fingertip basis, and for very little cost.
I think before we pass the matter over to the audience to take questions from them, just a few words. What do you think about 6 of 1 from what you've seen?
I'm so thrilled. I mean, I'm just thrilled. I mean, there's 4 generations of Prisoner audience here in the village. I mean, I don't know. All kinds of telling, because I mean, it's the sort of thing that in his own brother he gave me has his picture on the cover, signing the mighty brand.
Are you playing the part of
Yeah.
that? And when will this be on, Alex?
That will be on in the spring. With a little help from God.
Well, anything else, Dave, or should we get some questions?
I think we should get some questions.
Get them to shout out, and then we'll sort of feed them.
Repeat the question. Glennis.
There's a young man with a baseball cap who lent me a pen, and the pen has not been lost, I promise you.
Just shout it out there, Glennis, and then we'll repeat it. Why did Alexis have a box around his name in the credits before that?
I think that was Patrick and Dave's way of saying thank you. It became, you know, this thing became like a family going through a war. And it became at some point hard to tell who was responsible for what. It really became a kind of collaboration at the end. I think also I had a good agent. Right. Right. All the production stills, they always say to you, now Patrick, do something and hold the script in your hand and indicate something, because he's wearing the better costume with the top hat and all. So they always have the director doing something. Oh yes, I mean, he was very explicit about it. I mean, when I used to finish running around for 49 times around that set, trying to, for my life, and fall on the floor in front of him, he said to me, "You're not breathing hard enough." I said, how do you want me to breathe? He said, like this. Like a lean and hungry wolfhound.
Yeah, I think Peter's very interested in sort of religious imagery of Fallout. Do you think there was an aspect of that?
Yes, and it's not an accident that the bones, the biblical bones, I mean, he's got a huge mind. He wrote the first draft on an aeroplane. I saw it in the aeroplane. And then we went on doing it over and over and changing and fixing and doing and then we saw the set and none of it worked, so we started all over again. The set was enormous. It took up 2 sound stages in the studio that were the size of aircraft hangars and huge set, dwarfed what Kubrick was filming next door. And
that was 2001.
2001, yeah. As a matter of fact, Pat and I had to share the corridor. Our dressing rooms were right next to the leopard. Came up one morning with a sign saying, "Beware dangerous animal." I thought it was one of Patrick's jokes. He put it right in front of my door. And there was a dangerous animal in the next dressing room.
Mike's not switched on. It's on the bottom, right on the base. No, it's not switched on. There's a little switch just on the bottom, right underneath, on the end. It's not.
You told us how you prepared for the part of the kids. I wondered how you what you want, where can I get some?
Well, how did you prepare?
How did you prepare for the part of number 48?
I don't think I had to prepare much for that at that point. And Patrick, the show was very intricately and minutely designed to the last detail. He gave me complete freedom as to how it would look and what to do. And he let me go down to Carnaby Street and come back with an outfit, so he insisted on the top hat. And Carnaby Street was full of rebellious kids. There wasn't any need for a history at that point. I'd played it 3, that was my 3rd time really playing variations of the rebellious youth at that. Although, as you probably noticed, there's quite a huge, hugely important play on the word daddy.
I think a lot of people like to ask that we really love your intensity of performance in the last few episodes of The Prisoner. And I'd probably ask a few trivial aspects of the wines.
Would you like a drink?
He doesn't drink.
I'd love it.
Who is down the front?
What we need to see is some of his magic.
They all agree, really. They're just disguising it superbly.
Don't all answer at once.
When you were hitchhiking on the highway, motorway, where do you think you ended up? Did you ride? Did you walk?
We didn't stay to find out, but I knew that I was probably going to end up in Tokyo at the Olympics, one way or the other. The world was full of kids at that time who were going to places like Kathmandu with nothing on their back, just the clothes they were wearing.
Hi. What did Charles film here? How did it take that?
What are the chances of the film actually being made in Portmeirion?
You can hear this, no?
And the other thing you got it.
What are the chances of the film being made in Portmeirion? Of course the film will be made in Portmeirion. Or at least, the exterior sequences for the village. Well, it wouldn't surprise me if he's standing behind the bush right now and they wouldn't know. Because that's the kind of guy he is. When he's ready, they'll know. I had to, at that time, continuously do that. I looked older, I was big, and also there was a kind of... the world tended to hate this bunch of kids who had risen up in revolt. In America, they were against the war in Vietnam, and all over the world they were in a state of complete free love and flower power and all that stuff. And so it was very dangerous to be a teenager, especially if you had to make a living. They just thought you were a brat.
We just take two more. Any more questions? Any more at the back? Do you want me to come over there? No, I'll just do these two down here then, if it's okay.
Yeah, Alexis, have you got any theories of what your character Fallout was doing in the village in the first place? Why he was brought there?
I think he was just a rebellious youth that was in there like being in Borstal, for being a sower of dissent and discontent. Probably walked up and down with a placard, peace, love, anti-nuclear, basically the sort of stuff that governments aren't terribly keen on.
Do you not think the advent of new technology will, like it was the news in the film,
No, because no. When I say that the new technology will be used, I don't mean that the film will be full of gadgets. I mean that the effects, the surreal effects, will be more visually appropriate to the big screen, and it will be possible to be more scary without becoming. It's not going to be a gadget subject. I just mean that it's now possible, for example, to. It's now possible what wasn't possible. Then Rover had to be filmed in little bits. It would now be possible with the help of the computer for Rover to literally chase somebody across the rooftops, down the alleys, into the kitchen, and up the bathroom stairs. And change size at every door frame. No, I think Patrick's too smart for that. Yes, no, I think.
Don't hear the question.
Yes. Well, I think that Patrick is too good an artist and too smart a woman to allow that to happen. He won't allow it to be slick, and I have seen that new Doctor Who, and I do understand what it is you mean. Now he will not let the technology run the show. It will only be used, obviously, to enhance the drama.
Right, thank you. Dave, do you want to add any more questions? Yes?
Well, I mean, before that, I think, Alex, after you've had a meal this evening, you'll be around, won't you?
Yeah, just go to the party.
So, if you're around, I'm sure you'd be happy to take Rich on dinner.
Yeah.
Answer questions.
Just say obviously our utmost appreciation to Alexis for coming all this way and being so accessible. I just thank Arabella, who's brought him here. He's come up to London and then been brought down by Arabella and been taken back. So thanks, Arabella, for doing that. And
we'll obviously, through the pages of the magazine, we'll let you know what Alexis is getting on, and I think we should all support whatever he produces in the theatre.
And obviously, Dave Healy will be able to cover the interview, so and the future news. There'll be plenty of opportunities, we hope, to meet up with Alexis again. I think we should also thank Steve Ricks and Rick Booth for putting things into the programme in such an imaginative way and at such short notice. So thanks so much. And if that's all the thanks, it just leaves us to say thank you, Alexis, for being so accessible and so entertaining, and thanks for being there.
Really? Down here in the word of the Lord. Alex, Patrick said to me one day when we were, is that right? We were both asked to do this picture by this guy, and I said, what do you think? It's a good script, Pat. And he said, yeah, but that guy's hip bone ain't collected to his thigh bone the way yours and mine is, so we're not doing it. Thank you.